In this segment, we'll take you through the last 6 months of activities, which was mostly scratch building buildings for our industrial segment of the layout. So let's take a look. In this segment, we're going to talk about construction of the federal cold storage unit. In Cleveland, there were a lot of produce delivered to the market, and so there was several cold storage units. This one, many people be familiar with. It's right near the Interbelt. It was just torn down for the new Interbelt. But the one we're modeling after is actually this federal cold storage, which was part of the Northeast Ohio food terminal, which was built in 1929 by the Nickel Plate, which delivered a lot of the produce. It was their specialty. And so this is the unit we used to model that. One of the precepts of the layout is, of course, from farm to and industry back into the city. And so since I have a lot of milk reefers and produce reefers, it's important to have both a creamery and this cold storage and also a produce auction house. So this was scratch built out of 80,000 styrene, modeled loosely after that unit in Cleveland, situated right next to the icing facility. And then in front of that, there'll be the auction house for produce. So again, this is really part of having a rationale for delivering stuff and our operating sessions. That's a philosophy I've tried to carry through with all of the industries. There you see in the blonde brick, that's going to be the board and creamery. Then there's here closest to us, we'll discuss the commissary building, and the far building was the produce building. A lot of the roof details, some of those are Corber and Ricks, but the main unit, the main evaporating unit here right in the middle, that's scratch built. And so pretty happy with how this turned out. Let's talk about the construction of the commissary building. Since I have extensive passenger operations, I felt it was necessary to have a commissary building to service the dining cars. And so the signage is both for New York Central and for Pullman. And these were part of all the major hubs along the railway where they restocked the dining cars and the sleepers. So this was a multi-unit Corber building. And again, these buildings are not, they're just cited so we can get the track layout. There'll be a lot more detail to be added to those. But the sign was custom done in Photoshop. And so as you can see, there'll be 2 tracks that can service right out of the coach yard when we hold operating sessions. So let's move on to the next segment. As a kid driving across the Shoreway Bridge in Cleveland, you often saw, and you see the bridge in the background there, you saw this big tall structure with this green neon light Huron cement. And so Cleveland as a lake port was a source of a lot of cement products coming in. So here you see the ore boats coming around the bend and unloading, getting ready to unload there at the Huron Cement warehouse. And so we modeled that strictly from a Corber mill grain elevator, and lettered it appropriately with the Huron Cement sign, and it'll have its own siding and storage building next to it. The milk business was very important to the New York Central, so I wanted to model a condensed milk plant based on some of these prototypes that you see here from upstate New York. I have a large fleet of milk cars, and so The idea would be they're coming from the country into town. Normally that would have been New York City, but as you can see, many of these are rural based. This particular one here is actually in Burlington, Wisconsin, not too far from where we live in Chicago at the time. It's a DPM modular wall kit developed to something that I feel represents a condensed milk plant. Eventually, you see there on the left the necessary boiler house chimney because they used a lot of steam heat, water tower, air conditioning unit. So that's about it. The diesel maintenance facility is an Altoona Model Works product. Here you see his version of it, complete with the side unit. It's loosely going to be representational of the one that was at Collinwood. Here you see an aerial of that particular one. It's going to sit in front of my transfer table. Here you see a shot near the end from the bridge at East 152nd, and here's the construction of it. It went together very well. It's a very well done unit with complete interior if you want it, including steam piping along the sides under the windows, lighting if you want it. I opted for the steam piping, the lighting, and also the service platform that runs down the center of it. Again, quite easy to construct. And there you see the transfer table, the Ross transfer table in front of it that will supply the locomotives. There you see the service platform. All in all, I was, again, very pleased with how this kit went together and look forward to having it as an addition at the end of our service facility. Here's a view from the other side. And again, these buildings are not cited, just cited and not put together with all the detail yet, just to kind of get a spacing of all the track. So let's move on to the next project. The flax mill on the Cuyahoga River. This is a picture from the 30s and then another one from the early 50s. We used that as a model. It serviced, it took in flaxseed, obviously, from boats coming in from Lake Erie, and then processed that into linseed oil and flax soap. And so you can see various iterations of this. This is a later iteration. We are actually modeling an earlier iteration of that. This boat is actually unloading at the gypsum plant next door, but you can see that's an early version from the 20s. I used the photograph and then SketchUp from Google to design the building to scale. It's 120 feet high with its loading leg there, and of course the storage facilities, and then a linseed oil mill behind that, and a flax soap building where we make flax soap, which was the Sherwin-Williams brand, which is very similar to Murphy's Oil Soap. So what you can see here, it's a corrugated building. That's just corrugated paper from Hobby Lobby. It's pretty expensive to do it in styrene, but there is an 80 thousandths styrene under structure about that whole building, and grant line windows and doors. And here you can see the whole complex with the Sherwin-Williams complex with the soap plant over there on the left, the linseed oil mills, and so there's a big tank farm that will be built as well. In the back there is a solvent extraction plant that was part of this process. They did take in rail cars, and so we'll have that option as well, and the aisle serves as kind of the proxy for the Cuyahoga River. The flax building is, of course, a Corber building. The actual linseed oil building, another Corber building. The solvent extraction building here in the foreground is scratch built off of a picture. The logo was taken off the internet, put into Photoshop, printed out on some very fine onion skin paper. Lettering was stenciled on the side of the building. Here you can see the relationship of the flax mill to the gypsum plant. Again, a closer look at that solvent extraction building. Again, that was scratch built to the picture, again using the Google SketchUp program to secure the dimensions. Very helpful program. Put in the photograph, put in a known dimension, whether that's a door, a window. In the case of the flax mill, it happened to be a hopper car, and then you can pro out the building to whatever scale you want. There you see the Flax Soap logo on this particular building. And again, all these buildings, there's the actual photograph of the solvent extraction building. Again, all these are just here for placement to get the track alignment before we fully site these in and detail them. So let's move on to the next segment, and which I think is the cement plant. The gypsum plant is scratch built. It's loosely modeled after a Cleveland Builder Supply plant that stood next to the Sherwin-Williams flax mill. So you can see it here. The Sherwin-Williams plant would be to the left. And all we really have is that picture you just saw, plus this Sanborn map that gives us kind of an idea of the layout of the building, the storage facilities. And then in the back, there was a gypsum board and gypsum plant for plaster and drywall. So again, this will be right next to the Sherwin-Williams facility, as it was on the Cuyahoga. It received its raw material from ore boats or from rail. And so again, a very loose interpretation, but one I felt would fit in since historically it was right next to that unit. Again, a lot of the details on the roof are from the RICS kits. Those are HO kits, but most of the things fit very nicely in O scale. Constructed of 80,000 styrene, Grant line windows, and of course the tanks are PVC piping. So the drywall building in the back will be a takeoff of a Corber building. So that's where it stands. Let's move on. As I've said several times, one of the objectives of the layout is to provide a rationale of all the cars I have with industries that are appropriate. So because of all the reefers and milk cars, this is a picture of the Northeast Food Terminal. It was built by the Nickel Plate as part of the Cleveland Union Terminal construction, and it serves as a loose model here using some Corber wall units to build a produce auction house. Of course, we have the federal ice cold storage next to it. So again, giving rationale to the industries, having a reason in an operating session to deliver cars from the farm out and into the city, and to be either re-iced, unloaded at the cold storage, or unloaded at the produce warehouse. In this particular building, you see the relationship of the cold storage, the creamery, the commissary, and the produce warehouse with the icing platform in the back. View from the other side, this will be here in the front, the boiler operation for the board and creamery. Again, this building went together very well. That was a Corber water tower on top with a Corber air conditioning unit, and I think the roof details really add to the realism of all these buildings, and I think they're an important part and are not very difficult to put together. As a wrap up, I'd like to show just this whole end of the layout. So you have sort of an industrial flavor to it. But there are some retail operations here. These are mostly Woodland Scenics buildings, a few downtown deco buildings, um, a couple of Maritime buildings, and so there will be a retail aspect or town aspect to this whole industrial area, much as the Flats was in its heyday. There you see a micro scale paint plant, which will be the Enterprise paint plant. And here you see the entrance to the freight yard, which leads down on one side to the passenger terminal and on the other, of course, to the engine service. Another view of several of these buildings, downtown deco, um, Harbor, downtown deco freight building. And here you can see its relationship to all of the industrial buildings. That's the new Menard building, the green building in the background there, which fits in very nicely on that side track through the flax mill and through the gypsum plant. So all in all, there'll be a lot more detail added in there, but that's sort of an overall look from this layout, end of the layout. So that's it for this segment. Hope you enjoyed it.